By way of introduction, my name's Dustin Kirkland. I am from Texas, from Austin, Texas. I've been working on Ubuntu since 2007 and with Canonical since 2008, basically. I lead the product team at this point, and I've got some information here to present to you in terms of the feedback that we've gotten so far. This presentation is really about the feedback we've received from yourselves and the broader Ubuntu community, especially anyone watching at home or watching sometime here in the not too distant future. We'll talk a little bit about Desktop Server, a little bit about Ubuntu Desktop, Ubuntu Server, and Ubuntu for all of the other things. So getting started, we'll start with the desktop, right? That's where Ubuntu started. We're never going to leave the desktop behind. So let's talk about the desktop. First of all, back in May of this year, sort of on a whim, I posted this thread on Hacker News where basically I said, hey, we're soliciting feedback. We're looking for what do you want to see in Ubuntu 17.10. And here we are in September of 2017 with Ubuntu 17.10 releasing in just a matter of a couple of weeks from now. And on that thread, quite unexpectedly, I posted that thread from Heathrow Airport and then got onto a plane, and it was about 2 hours later when I finally logged on to see there were almost 500 comments in the first 2 hours. And it went on to become one of the most discussed threads. It's in like the top 2 or 3 in Hacker News all time. I think the only 2 ahead of it was a discussion about Brexit and a discussion about Apple's refusal to provide the fingerprint unlock for an iPhone that was seized by the FBI. So in terms of generating discussion, real hats off to everyone who cares about Ubuntu. Now, this thread asked for lots of different, or opened the floor to feedback on Desktop Server and everything in between. As it turns out, most of the commentary was about desktop, which surprised me a little bit, but we certainly took that into account. I'm pleased to say that of the things that were listed, and there were hundreds of requests, some of these were the top priority requests, the things that came about most frequently or were repeated most often. These are all things that we made tremendous progress on in 17.10. Love it or like it, we've replaced Unity with GNOME. Hats off to the Ubuntu Desktop team, both at Canonical and the community, for bringing that together. We have a new BlueZ set of libraries that improve Bluetooth tremendously. I'm actually recording this presentation right now over a Bluetooth headset. That's been working absolutely flawlessly this cycle. libinput helps a bit with the various different input types to Ubuntu. 4K and multi-monitor high DPI support is something that I think we're going to see more and more devices that are capable of these features, and we've worked quite a bit on the desktop side of things, bringing that together. In fact, sprinted with our friends at Red Hat to help pull some of that together. There's a newer network manager. We actually have a new server installer, an image-based installer. That was something that was requested. We actually had some of that work in the pipeline. We pulled that in and got a bit more done this cycle. The Ubuntu minimal images, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but they're actually 20% smaller. We now have minimal Ubuntu images that are merely 36 megabytes. That's down from about 45 megabytes as of 1604. And we're looking to do maybe even more with that for 1804. We're doing quite a bit around automatically removing old kernels from /boot. This is one of the most annoying things about, if you've been on Ubuntu for a very long time, there's a lot of different ways you can sort of get one tire off the rails, and that's all it takes to then start accumulating a bunch of kernels in your boot partition and fill that boot partition up. We've done a lot of work with Google on ext4 encryption with FSCrypt. Eventually, we plan to deprecate eCryptFS in favor of ext encryption. And then we've been working quite a bit with AMD and NVIDIA about better GPU and CUDA support specifically. That's useful on both the server side of things as well as in the desktop for lots of fun desktop applications. So the key point here is that feedback matters. We really try to take that into account. We can't solve every bug. We can't address every single feature. But please feel like we are building a community distribution, and forums like this, we take every advantage of every opportunity we have to talk to users. So we did something similar in July, just a couple of months ago. We asked the community across 3 different forums. When I posted the previous thread about what do you want to see in 17.10 to Hacker News, I immediately got emails from the editors of both Reddit and Slashdot saying, our users want to contribute to this thread as well. And so I said in the future we'd certainly make this, we'd open up the feedback to Reddit and Slashdot. And so we posted this in July, and it was a coordinated effort, as opposed to the first one, which was something that we just sort of shot from the hip. This was one that we put together. I worked with Will Cook, who's the desktop manager at Canonical, and some of his team to put together what amounted to a survey for the desktop apps. What desktop apps do you use on Ubuntu? Out of curiosity, did anyone here contribute to that survey, provide answers, responses? Great. Are you curious what the feedback looks like? Excellent. Well, good. That's the next few minutes of this talk, is actually, for the first time, presenting publicly the results of that survey. So, in fact, there were over 10,000 responses to that survey, which is tremendous. The bit.ly link that linked to the survey was clicked almost 14,000 times, and there were over 10,000 responses. So that's a tremendous response rate to the number of people who clicked on the link and then actually left a response. And I also want to shout out to Luis, who's a community member in Ubuntu. He helped create that Google survey. I would say, ashamedly, what we did as engineers and engineering managers, we posted the question to each of those threads, to Hacker News and Reddit and Slashdot. But what we didn't do was create a Google survey. So people started leaving the responses in comments, and that's totally what I expected, and expected to have to do a lot of natural language processing, which we did, and that was painstaking. I'll tell you, it's a hell of a lot easier if you just create a Google survey up front. The output goes directly into a Google spreadsheet and then makes the data treatment a lot easier. But rest assured, we did go through all of the survey responses as well as the threads that were the comments that were left in Hacker News, Reddit, and Slashdot, and sort of put that together. I am proud to say one person actually got it right. So just so you know, Ubuntu is actually, in the future, we're just going to be Emacs for everything, except for text editing, in which case we're going to use Vim. But yeah, kudos to one anonymous coward. This was absolutely brilliant, and of the 10,000 responses, my favorite by far. So let's look at the results, right? In all seriousness. First of all, not everyone responded on every one of the categories. We asked for what's your preferred browser and email and text editor and file suite, file browsing suite and photo editor and so forth. I think this is interesting in that, to an extent, it demonstrates a little bit of the attachment desktop users have to certain applications. One that is near and dear to my heart, which is not necessarily interesting to others, is a screen recorder. I'm actually using a screen recorder to record this presentation. I do that quite a bit. I do a lot of demonstrations and posts to YouTube, how-tos and tutorials. That's important to me. I find all of them a bit painful, and I learned that there's a few alternatives out there. So even in cases where there's a couple of standout applications, what's interesting from an open source and an Ubuntu community perspective is how many choices we have in the software repository of applications. So not unexpectedly, we see browser, video player, email, text editor, Office suite sort of to the far left. In the middle, I'm just going to read these out. I don't know how readable these are with the screen resolution. Then we'll see music player, file browser, terminal, PDF reader, photo editor, and then it's IRC messaging, calendar, photo viewer, IDE, development interface, video editor, and screen recorder. So we'll go through each of these one slide per. I'll just spend a minute or two on each. First of all, web browser. Firefox, Chromium, Chrome, maybe not unsurprisingly to the far left of the chart, and then sort of a long tail of other browsers. Some are your text-based browsers, curl, elinks, but Opera, Vivaldi also show up in this part of the chart. What we've done at Canonical, the Ubuntu Desktop team, has taken sort of the large area of the bar chart, so the leftmost part of the bar chart, and we were actually examining each of these, especially where there are applications that maybe we've not shipped in Ubuntu before, or we've not shipped as the default before. What I'm not able to do today is tell you what defaults are changing, but what I am able to show you is where our research and development is focused for the 1804 cycle. So that's web browser, maybe that one not too surprising. Video player, we have here VLC, accounting for the majority of the responses, which is interesting in that VLC is not the default video player in Ubuntu. So this is a case where there's a great video player that we've not shipped yet to date as the default video player. You'll find MPV, Totem, SM player, and M player sort of next in that significant part of the curve here. From an email perspective, Thunderbird is the overwhelming most popular result, followed by Gmail, Evolution, Geary, and then sort of a long tail of other alternatives. So this is one that we've long shipped Thunderbird as the default email client, the local email client in Ubuntu. Text editor, gedit on the far left, followed by Vim, Kate, Nano, Atom. So of course we've got a couple of text-based ones in here, Vim and Nano. But from a desktop perspective, gedit seems to be the overwhelming favorite general purpose desktop text editor. Office suite, you'll find LibreOffice seems to be the local office suite, and then sort of a long tail of other ways of editing documents and creating presentations on Linux. Music player is, I think, one of the more interesting charts here, and one of the places where we've actually got quite a bit of work to do to figure out what the right answer is for a music player on Ubuntu. And I'll sort of get to that. I'll paint that picture here toward the end of this, which is where our thinking's going. But this chart is heavily influencing that thinking. So VLC is actually the leftmost, followed by Rhythmbox. And there's actually 6 other spellings of Rhythmbox you'll find elsewhere in the chart. It turns out rhythm is a very difficult English word to spell. So I think if we summed up all of the Rhythmbox, it'd actually be a little bit of a taller bar there. You'll find over the course of the last 14 years, we've shipped a number of different music players in Ubuntu as the default. You'll find Amarok and Banshee and a handful of others here. And you'll also find quite a bit of online-only, streaming music. Spotify is on here. Pandora is also on here. So music seems to be one of those places where it's not like the LibreOffice slide where there's one clear, overwhelming favorite. This one actually, there's quite a bit of variety that we expect out of our music player. File browser, Nautilus seems to be sufficient for most uses. You'll find Dolphin, Nemo, and Thunar. I've never heard of Thunar, but this is XFCE. Okay, so we found these quite educational in most cases. I would say I learned a lot about the Linux application landscape just doing this survey. From a terminal perspective, GNOME terminal, which has long been the default terminal on Ubuntu, seems to work well for most people. But there's a number of other interesting ones in here: Terminator, Console, Tilix, and then Xterm, Quake, XFCE terminal. So from a terminal perspective, seem to be a lot of options where GNOME terminal seems to fit the bill for most people. PDF reader, this chart looks very similar to the previous one, where Events, which is the standard PDF reader in Ubuntu, is the leading PDF reader. Ocular, and then Adobe and others you'll find elsewhere in the chart. From a photo editor, GIMP seems to be the primary application Ubuntu users use to edit photos. Darktable also shows up here as well. So some of these charts have a very similar pattern to others, where there's one overwhelming favorite and then a number of other choices, which again I think is the beauty of Ubuntu, just the amount of choice that's available. The IRC messaging chart looks a lot more like that music player chart, where Pigeon is the leftmost one, but then a really diverse crowd of different ways people use to message and talk to one another. I know personally I use multiple of these applications to talk to different people, different teams. So this is one case where a single messaging client isn't necessarily the best approach. Sometimes multiple applications are needed for different use cases. The calendaring curve is actually really interesting, where there's sort of 4 different calendaring applications that are closely bunched, and then a handful of others. GNOME Calendar, Thunderbird, Google, and Lightning seem to have just a closer correlation than the rest. Evolution in using a web-based calendar, which I think is probably also Google Calendar and web-based, could potentially be the same response from different people. Yeah, there's a question from the audience. Yeah.
Is Lightning not part of Thunderbird?
That's a good question. So it's possible that Thunderbird and Lightning are actually stacked on top of one another as well, and then maybe Google and Web are stacked. So this was part of the problem of this being a free-form survey response as opposed to like a pick and choose. We went back and forth whether we'd make it choose one of these or free-form. We decided to go free-form and then do the text, the natural language processing afterward. I see Lightning actually misspelled over here, and so there's Thunderbird, Lightning is combined here. So there's a couple of different ways of specifying Thunderbird, Lightning, and Google Calendar, Gmail, Web. So we have a little bit more work to do to really sum that up if we needed to be super scientific about it. For the most part, I think what we see is a general grouping, and that's helped us aim our actual research and development to see what code bases are going to work best for Ubuntu users. From a photo viewer perspective, we see actually a really smooth curve with a lot of different options. Shotwell, EOG to the far left, gthumb to the far left, but a lot of different ways of viewing photos in Ubuntu here. So once again, one that there's a lot of options and a lot of options that fit a lot of different people and different needs. The IDE chart also looks a bit like that calendar chart, where there's a lot of Visual Studio and Eclipse, but a lot of personal choices that are reflected by a lot of other IDEs and development environments. So from a video editor perspective, this was, I think, one of the most interesting ones from my perspective, in that I often want to edit videos on Ubuntu, but I find it really painful to do so. I see that I've been using some of the wrong tools. I think I've been using PTV, which is 1, 2, 3, the 4th bar chart. Looks like there's 3 better alternatives I've never actually even tried. KD, InLive, OpenShot, AVI, Demux might be better alternatives. So just from an educational perspective, some of these responses helped us maybe beyond just, maybe it was just me, but it helped some of us learn about some of the other applications out there for editing videos. And then lastly, recording screens. You'll find not very many, but also a diversity of screen recorders. I'm using GTK Record My Desktop for this presentation, and ideally I'll make it through this recording without it crashing, and I'll have a copy of this presentation, but that's not always the case when I'm recording my desktop, it seems. So that is, oh, there's one last one. We also took a look at bonus apps, just other things that people are asking for that we don't typically ship or ship by default in Ubuntu. And overwhelmingly, HTOP, there's a lot of people who like HTOP. I really like HTOP, but we've never shipped that by default in the Ubuntu server. I think partially because HTOP is easy to spell, it shows up here, and we're able to match it very easily. But there's a lot of different applications that just this was a finite survey, but we wanted to give people the opportunity to just give us general feedback. So I would say the desktop team is hard at work processing this data. You've seen some basic data treatment of it. The next step is to examine the state of a number of those applications and utilities in the open source in terms of their quality and their security and their maintainability. We're also thinking about a different approach to default applications in Ubuntu. So we've long taken the view that we try to make some opinionated choices and ship the best application for any one of those different application categories in Ubuntu. The thinking that we have now is something that fits a little bit more like a choose your own adventure book, where as part of the Ubuntu install process, perhaps, you're asked to choose your browser, your video player, your music player up front, perhaps in a configuration menu even after the fact. We'll certainly have a recommended default. If you don't care what your screen recorder is, you can skip that and you'll either not get one or get whatever the default one is. But actually we think that might make for a more personal experience in Ubuntu to have a couple of high quality choices offered. So that's the desktop portion of this presentation. I'm going to go into server next, but if there's any questions or feedback on this, I've got a minute or two. Phil.
How do you work with, one, the evolution of more SaaS-based products to where, in a sense, the need for desktop apps are diminishing due to a SaaS-based presence? And then how do you incorporate when many people's preferred application necessarily isn't available or isn't in the repo? Say my company recently switched from IRC to Slack.
Right.
And now, it's not in the repo.
Yeah, so I'll repeat the question just for the camera. The question is, how do we deal with more SaaS-based applications, and how do we deal with applications that aren't packaged for Ubuntu? So I think that's a great question, and you're absolutely right. We have moved to a SaaS-based. I rarely listen to music local to my desktop now, although I have thousands of music files. It tends to be Spotify or Pandora or something like that. And if it's not that, it's some of these other applications. So I think it's super important that we have native clients available for Ubuntu when possible, and when not, just to ensure that the browser-based experience, which is how many of those SaaS applications are delivered, be it Google Calendar or Google Docs or Office 365. So from that approach, we want to have native packages where it makes sense. Spotify is a good example of that. And we want really good browser integration when it is entirely browser-based. On the application not yet packaged, we've had a number of presentations this week around snaps, and actually I'll get to that here in this presentation. But we've really tried to take the difficulty and the mystery out of packaging. I've been a Debian packager for a very long time to date, and Deb packaging, while possible, is not a great fit for some modern software. And so we've put a lot of research and development into snap-based applications. packaging format. And I think that's our solution to that problem in the long run. I'll mention Spotify again, in that we have a snap for the Spotify client, for instance. So going forward, that's going to be our approach. So let me move to the server section to make sure that we get through this. So Ubuntu Server. I assume everyone here had at least an interest in Ubuntu Desktop, but who's interested in Ubuntu as a server platform? Cool. So that's really where I spend most of my days and nights, is working on the Ubuntu Server. And I'll say that we're super proud of how far and wide Ubuntu is used today. This is a little bit of a businessy slide for a community conference, but anyone who contributes to Ubuntu, I think, should be proud to know that Netflix runs entirely on Ubuntu. Tesla's, the car running around on electricity only, is running Ubuntu in the dash. There's lots of different examples. I'm sure we could find some in your own local locales as well. But this is a colorful slide of some of the incredible places that depend on Ubuntu every single day. So the first major change that I think is worth considering is that we've actually created a minimal Ubuntu server image that's merely 36 megabytes. That's a compressed image. That's a compressed root file system, but that's effectively the input to Docker containers and other containers. What is minimal Ubuntu? The definition of minimal Ubuntu for us is the smallest Ubuntu image required to be able to apt-get install anything else, right? So it's a starting point. It doesn't have a whole lot in it, but it has enough of apt and the apt database to then apt install anything else you want on top of that. Okay. Now that image does not include a kernel. A kernel is about that size as well, but we've done a lot of work on shrinking the kernel down. Inside of a container image, you don't need a kernel, of course. We have a different image for a kernel, but that is the root file system that fits into our image that is kernel plus root file system. That's the difference. That's a 20% difference. That's almost 10 megabytes difference between where we were as of 1604 Xennial and where we are in 1710 Artful. I took those two snapshots yesterday, so you can see that this data is up to date as of now. We've got a little bit more work to do on 1710. I don't think we'll see any more major changes to 1710, but we do hope to get that number smaller by 1804. 1804 being our next LTS will be an Ubuntu server release that's used in production for a very, very long time, in fact. So we're hoping to bring that down a little bit more. I've got a blog post that's coming out in a few weeks where we'll actually look at the difference between those two images from a package manifest as well as a file manifest. And we're going to solicit feedback, just like we did for the desktop apps. We're going to solicit feedback on the default Ubuntu server experience. Are there things that we're missing that we need to add? Hopefully not, but maybe. Are there more things that we could get rid of? I think we've gotten rid of...
Is that the question you're going to be asking? What else can we drop?
Ideally, yes. But part of getting actually a large part of that 20%, we removed locales. So we removed non-English locales, which is a bit unfortunate. I'm speaking here today in a non-English speaking locale. And so it was something that was a tough decision that we made to drop other. Now you can easily add those locales back with a single command if you know what you're doing. But locales was the translations of all of the different messages from a server perspective cost a couple of megabytes of space. So that was something we removed, but we're curious what those implications are. Now, to an extent, maybe it doesn't matter so much. These are server instances that are running at scale, tens of thousands of them, perhaps behind a Netflix or an Uber or Lyft type service, where interfacing with the server itself, the locale doesn't matter so much because what you're actually interfacing with is a Golang application or some PHP or Python application running on it. Maybe it doesn't matter so much because those can be added later. The other thing that we're considering removing is documentation, man pages, info pages. I love man pages. I read them all the time, but I read them on my desktop or on my big server, not one of these minimal servers. You know, do you have to have a man page on that local server? You can read the man pages on the web. Manpages.ubuntu.com renders every man page as a HTML file, for instance. So that's the sort of thing we're looking for. If other people have other ideas of, you know, once you look at what's taking up space, what that file manifest is there room to remove other things? So look for that survey request for feedback, RFC, coming out probably right around the release of 17.10. I think we're going to get 17.10 out the door first, and then after that we're going to start with that base image as our starting point, and we're going to see where we want to go from there. So I've got just a couple of slides on the things that make up Ubuntu Server for us, and I can tell you briefly, you know, what we've done and where we're thinking about going. MAS, Metal as a Service. Does anybody here use MAS? It's wow. Okay, MAS is awesome. If you don't know what it is, it's a brilliant way to provision Ubuntu onto physical systems. So MAS is actually being used at EA, which is a gaming company, produces a bunch of sports games, FIFA World Cup for the PlayStation and the Xbox. It's used by Ubisoft, which is a French company behind Assassin's Creed and a number of other major games. MAS puts Ubuntu and other operating systems, actually, Windows and Debian and RHEL and SLES, onto physical machines remotely without having to go to that machine with a USB stick. So if you're installing 1 or 2 servers, you can walk in the lab and stick a USB stick. If you're installing tens or hundreds or maybe thousands of servers in a data center, you need something like MAS to do that. And as it turns out, MAS is a brilliant way of doing that. This is an open source project led by Canonical. If you've ever been a sysadmin before, it includes all of the uninteresting things you've set up over and over and over again, like DHCP and DNS and bind. Well, bind is DNS, but all the different things that it takes to put together a lab. MAS makes all that dead simple. Apt install MAS, and you've got basically everything you need to run a major data center running on a single server. Now you can span that out, make it highly available. Those are the sorts of things we're working on next with MAS. Most of the feedback, I said this presentation is about feedback, most of the feedback we get about MAS comes from enterprise users of Ubuntu. I run MAS at home. MAS takes care of my DNS and DHCP. You certainly can. You can put it on a Raspberry Pi and replace your DHCP and DNS server if you want and take advantage of MAS if you've got other physical machines you want to remotely provision without a USB stick. It's great for that. If you don't have a usage for MAS, then no big deal. But if you've got a lab, man, you really want a MAS server in there.
Maybe you can publish tutorials.
A tutorial on MAS, yeah. We've got a few webinars. We have a few videos, but tutorials.ubuntu.com has a brilliant set of tutorials. So yeah.
Can use with the Raspberry.
How to do MAS on a Raspberry Pi? Yeah, we call it the Masberry Pi. Yeah. The next one is LXD machine containers. Is anyone using LXD machine containers? Oh my goodness, this is the quickest way to get a new instance of Ubuntu, like an Ubuntu server, either locally on a system or remotely on a system. You can run dozens, hundreds of LXD containers on a laptop or on an instance in Amazon. This is just sort of a diagram of how it works. Basically, it's a container, so all of the containers on the system are sharing a single kernel, and there's a LXD daemon that runs on each of those machines that manages the containers on the system. LXD is just brilliant. It's a project that we've led for a very long time with contributions from all over, but this is really changing the way people approach containers in machine containers in Ubuntu. It's a little bit different than a Docker container in that in a Docker container you typically have just one process, one application inside of that Docker container. A LXD container intends instead to be a machine. It looks like a machine. It boots into a minimal Linux environment. PID1 is systemd, and off of PID1 you'll get an SSH server, and a syslog, and cron, and at, and a minimal number of things that are required for that machine to look like a system. Docker, by design, is very different than that. When you run a Docker container and you want Mongo or MySQL, you just get MySQL or Mongo inside of that Docker container. So if you've got extra feedback on LXD, we can talk about that at the end of this section. OpenStack, of course, continues to be super important to Ubuntu system administrators in production and in enterprises. OpenStack is an infrastructure as a service. So if you want to take a bunch of physical machines and carve those physical machines up into virtual machines, you can use something really expensive like VMware and vSphere, or you can use something open source and relatively inexpensive, free even, like OpenStack. OpenStack is complicated. It takes a large problem to need OpenStack as your solution to that problem. But for huge environments like Deutsche Telekom, they depend heavily on Ubuntu OpenStack to virtualize hardware into virtual machines. So we're working on the next release of OpenStack at this point. The last release just happened like a week ago. We're already working on the next release, and actually it'll be the one after that we ship in 1804. So we're looking at an 1804 in April of next year shipping a much newer OpenStack. OpenStack is one of the leading commercial solutions available from Canonical, and sort of how Canonical funds itself to help continue making Ubuntu available for the rest of us. The other half of that story, if not in infrastructure, virtual machines, it's really about containers, container orchestration. So for that, there's a new utility. I say it's new, it's newer than OpenStack, that we often find running alongside OpenStack. It actually can run inside of OpenStack, but sometimes it makes more sense to run alongside OpenStack. And that's something called Kubernetes. Kubernetes started as a Google project. It's now an open source project that we find all over the world, in fact, where sometimes containers are a better solution to a problem than virtual machines. So like OpenStack, we've developed at Canonical a commercial product around Kubernetes, and we're helping some customers deploy Kubernetes either inside their OpenStack or alongside their OpenStack to solve, enterprisey container problems. I should also mention Juju. Juju is another open source project that we lead. Juju ends up being, it's really become the world's best way to model really complex software. And what do I mean by that? I think we're all aware of what it takes to apt install a package, right? And apt, especially if you've been around Linux for a very long time, apt made chasing down dependencies very easy, right? If you're we were installing Hollywood earlier, and Hollywood depends on 50 other packages, and apt figures that out and installs them all in the right order on that system, links it up together, and boom, then you've got an application running. Juju does that, except the difference is that apt only knows about one machine, the local host, the local machine, okay? What happens if your complex software needs 100 machines, and you need 10 of those over there, and 5 of these right here, and 2 of these over here? And when I say here, here, and here, I mean you need a cluster of a database, and you need a cluster of some file system, and you need a messaging queue, and a web front end, and then a bunch of worker nodes, right? That's the one thing apt can't do. Apt can't provision new physical machines or new virtual machines. If you say apt install, I don't know, just a really complex suite of utilities. You can do that all on localhost, but if what you really need is to do that on multiple different systems and maybe instances or containers on those systems, you need to model that software, and that's what Juju does. So we've got a team working on Juju, which is critical to the deployment of big software on servers. This one is also interesting, Conjure Up. Conjure Up is essentially a really nice front end on Juju. So Conjure Up provides guided installation. It's almost like a text-based wizard for installing complex software. So with Conjure Up, you can just run Conjure Up OpenStack, or Conjure Up Kubernetes, or Conjure Up Hadoop. What that does in each of those cases is it presents you with a set of choices that you can make up front, and then it will create the YAML file that describes the complex software you want to deploy, and then call Juju to do that in the background. So you don't have to see or know anything about Juju. You just need to be able to tab and enter and click and make a couple of radio choices or freeform text choices, hit enter, and then get a coffee or a tea and wait. And then Juju takes care of all the coordination in the background, the provisioning of Microsoft Azure instances, or the provisioning of Amazon AWS instances, or the provisioning of Google instances, or maybe it's OpenStack instances, or it can even be physical machines with MAS. All that happens in the background after you've made that sort of guided selection. So again, Conjure Up is an open source project that we lead, and it's moving along with the 1804 cycle, and we're soliciting feedback on that as well. And then lastly, of the projects that I wanted to highlight that really makes Ubuntu Server, is CloudInit. CloudInit is it's basically the first process that runs in a virtual environment, in a cloud environment like Amazon or Google or Azure or OpenStack, or even MAS for that matter. CloudInit is the magic that enables us to create one Ubuntu server image, that minimal Ubuntu server image, put that in the cloud, but that one image be useful for anyone and everyone. Because rather than creating a unique image every time we want to create a web server, and that would be the Ubuntu plus Apache image, or the database server, which would be the Ubuntu plus MySQL. But you might like Postgres better, so now we'd have to create another AMI, or machine image, for Ubuntu plus Postgres. Instead of doing that, what we created is this process called CloudInit. CloudInit's able to take metadata that you pass to the instance when you launch it, that tells that instance what it's going to be when it grows up, right? It's a little bit of DNA that gets injected into that image that gives that image uniqueness or personality. And an administrator can do some pretty incredible things, from injecting SSH keys to installing software, to configuring that software, all using the same base image that everyone else uses, which has an important implication from a security perspective, which is it's far more secure to be on the general purpose image that we're all testing and QAing and improving, as opposed to having lots of different individual special snowflakes to have to manage. So that's CloudInit. We've done a lot of work with CloudInit recently that's made it useful in a number of other environments, and once again, it's a project that we certainly want feedback on whenever possible. So before I go to the last section of the presentation, time for a question or two about server or comment. Anyone? Rudy.
So will we have HTOP?
Will we have HTOP in the Ubuntu server? I certainly hope so. We probably won't have HTOP in the minimal image because of the definition of the minimal image. We're trying to take things out, not add into the minimal image. But the general Ubuntu image, what we call the comfortable Ubuntu image, I certainly hope so. I know that we've been working on an HTOP snap recently, which is could be a really compelling story. HTOP is a super useful utility. I'm a big fan, actually. One more.
Does the minimal image also include snaps?
Does the minimal image also include snapd? Good question. I don't know. I would need to check that manifest, but that's a good question. I think if the definition of minimal becomes the minimal Ubuntu required to either apt install or snap install something, then I think that minimal image would include snapd. If the minimal image definition remains the minimum included to apt install anything else, which means the first thing you could apt install is a snapd, maybe not. But that's a good one. I think we'll need to look at that and examine that. We do have an interest in it being as small as possible. as small as possible. So speaking of Snapd, let's just take a quick look at I'd say the third section of Ubuntu development, and that's Ubuntu for devices and embedded things. I think this slide is a slide I use often to set up, why are Ubuntu Snaps and Ubuntu Core just different than Debs? I like my Debs, I like my Ubuntu, Deb-based Ubuntu. Why do we need anything different? And I think it really comes down to this, that Linux servers and Linux devices are not the same thing. We could take the same approach. You can run Deb-based Ubuntu on a Raspberry Pi or an embedded system. I certainly have and do and will in certain circumstances. But the big difference is that there are some big differences. There's some important considerations that are significantly different, especially at scale. And by scale, I mean millions, perhaps billions of devices that might run Ubuntu Core before too long. And I think this slide kind of shows the big difference. The biggest one is that, or what it all comes down to, is that it's very expensive to fix a device. That device might be a lamp post out in the middle of nowhere, and to fix it involves someone rolling a truck out there and getting up a ladder and potentially reinstalling or replacing that device. That's an expensive operation, as opposed to a server, especially an instance in EC2, that you can just destroy and create a new one and do that remotely or even automatically, instead of having to wake someone up and asking them to do it for you. Especially when you consider how cheap these things end up being at scale. When you're talking millions or perhaps billions of them, we're talking about really inexpensive devices that you can't invest heavily in the software or the people and human resources required to surround and support that. And so it takes a very different approach. From an operating systems perspective, the different approach is something we call Ubuntu Core. Ubuntu Core is Ubuntu, but it's put together in a slightly different way. All of the binaries that go into Ubuntu Core, if you were to run MD5 checksums on user bin or user lib, or the binaries that make the base OS, are exactly the same as Ubuntu. And that's important because we're constantly fixing, we're constantly applying and developing security patches and bug fixes against Ubuntu. All of that work filters into Ubuntu Core. The difference is that Ubuntu Core is built in a way that the operating system itself is a read-only image. That's important for those reasons there on the right. To be able to remotely field service or remotely replace that OS and do that safely and at scale, we need to have images that are immutable, that are not tweaked or modified inside of etc., inside of individual files that have changed. We replace that OS, the OS part, the small core OS part, wholesale. We do that atomically. Applications themselves are built as snaps, which I think is this next slide. Yes. So snaps themselves are apps. From just a taxonomy perspective, a snap is like a deb. It's a package. It's a collection of it's a file that, when installed, delivers an application. The way that works is totally different, though. Each application itself is confined. That confinement is important from a security perspective. That keeps apps from being able to touch or modify or harm the system, other parts of the system. Each app also has its own writable area, and those apps themselves are updated in an atomic manner, so that apps can be reinstalled very easily. They can replace one another or replace previous versions or roll back to previous versions easily. And then finally, from an app developer perspective, snaps are very natural. It's a very natural way to deliver your application if you're a third-party app developer. So I'll take my operating system's hat off for a second. And as an app developer, I can ship my app where my app contains everything that I need for my app to run, rather than depending on the operating system, the versions of the libraries and tools I need in the operating system. You can still do that if you want. We have debs available, and there is you can depend on certain aspects of the standard library of the operating system itself. But what we found over the course of the last 10 or 15 years is that third-party applications are today developed in a way where the developer wants to be able to bring all of the libraries and tools that they need for that app together as part of that app. It's never been very elegant to do with debs or RPMs. And so we've created a new packaging format to handle that. And with respect to that, there's a third thing that I'll mention here, which is the Snapcraft utility. So Snapcraft is a developer utility that is led by Canonical, freely available. It provides an easy way to take an application and build that application into a snap. Martin gave or was it Alan? Gave both. Okay. Alan and Martin here gave a tutorial yesterday on how to create Snap packages, how to take applications and develop Snap packages. It's very fluid. It's super easy. I would encourage you, if you have any interest in either packaging or application development and making your applications available to the world of Linux users. Beyond just Ubuntu, snaps are available on other operating systems as well. Snapcraft is a great starting point. And with that, that's the end of the presentation, but also the part of the presentation focused on embedded things. So I'll ask first if there's any questions about the last third of the presentation, things, and then we can come back to anything else. Okay? What in the back? Right. So I'll repeat the question and just let me know if I've got it right. The question, I think you first acknowledged that Ubuntu Core and snaps themselves are immutable, that when they are updated, they're updated atomically in place, that sometimes those updates are security-related updates. And I think the question is, what guarantees, help me if I understand the question, what guarantees do we have that that snaps at any given level have security updates applied, or that those are going to be applied on the system? Guarantees around that?
No, it's more like in the architecture, in the immutable parts.
Right.
So it's snapd, for instance.
Right.
There's a security vault inside of this. How do you handle that?
Yeah, so if there's a security vulnerability inside of snapd itself, right? So snapd today is delivered as a deb, is that right? So no, snapd is delivered as a...
Originally you get it as a deb, but once it's installed...
Then it updates itself. Okay, got it. Okay, so the base snapd, the first snapd that you start with, is installed as a deb, but after that binary is there installed, it's then able to update itself within the Ubuntu Core snap. So the Ubuntu Core snap includes that base immutable operating system, but it also includes the snapd binary as well. That is something that we take great care and pride in securing and updating. The snap team itself is very closely aligned with the Ubuntu security team. So the Ubuntu security team is the team of Ubuntu developers who are very specifically focused on fixing CVEs and known security vulnerabilities. They also review third-party code and just give us tremendous advice over the security around Ubuntu. We've got a great track record, and that team is among the most expert teams in Canonical and frankly around operating systems in the world. They're very closely aligned with the snapd team in ensuring that the security within Ubuntu Core, the OS itself, as well as snapd, the binary that's handling application installation and running of snaps itself, is patched and up to date. So we have very tight guarantees around, as much as we can guarantee any software, that snapd and Ubuntu Core itself are following the best practices with respect to security and have security updates applied. That code is very heavily audited too. It's a good question, thank you. Security is near and dear to my heart, so I love a good question from a security angle. Rudy, what are we on a timeline? How much time do we have? Okay. Any other questions or feedback? This presentation was all about feedback so far. I'm keen to get more. I love feedback. Winaya.
Yeah.
Here you go.
I use a lot Lixi machine containers at work to to create a cluster to test a lot of things. And I use CloudInit to automatically install all I need to install on my machine. Do you know if there is some repository with CloudInit recipe? Because I think I always write something that other ops have to write before. So is there some repository where some people share the work they do, like we have in Snapcraft, for example, some recipes are shared or use the work for other people?
That's a great question and a great idea. So the question is CloudInit. I mentioned CloudInit, which is the way to basically inject personality into Ubuntu images, which start out very basic, but how do you tell that image to become something? What Waneil is saying is that he uses it quite a bit, but he ends up creating a lot of his own CloudInit metadata or CloudInit scripts, user data scripts, and what he would like would be a repository of those scripts where people can share their CloudInit information. That's a great example, or that's a great suggestion, and it's actually something we've been talking about and thinking about. We have a partner who came to us recently and suggested that same thing and said, and by the way, we've got a library of stuff that we would contribute to that. So your suggestion is duly noted, and I think we'll have something for you by 1804. And you're smiling ear to ear. I think you're happy with that response. Phil.
This is slightly about the server stuff, and as Canonical continues to try and work in that ecosystem with making the minimal size as minimal as can be, you get to a point where every single distro can really only do so much to take off megabyte after megabyte. I don't know what Alpine is now, but they're getting tinier than I can even think is appropriate to some extent. But what do you...
What's the lower limit is your question?
Yeah. Is there a limit at that point? Or when do you say we're done?
No, it's a great question. So the question's around the Ubuntu minimal server image. How minimal can you get? What's the lower bound? How much makes sense? This is something that I've been in the middle of and struggling with for a couple of years now. And typically the naive request is, I want Ubuntu to be smaller, just more minimal. Just make Ubuntu smaller. Why is Ubuntu so big? Make it smaller. And every single user that I've talked to, but more specifically every customer that I've talked to about that, we'll sit down and we'll pull up the manifest or we'll whiteboard it and say, okay, what do you want to remove? Let's talk about that. What do you want to remove? And we'll find a couple of things that we can remove. And then I'll say, okay, now I think we've got it. That's your minimal. And then immediately, it never stops there. The conversation always then turns to, yeah, but I also want to add this, and this. And so now it's not minimal anymore. You know, it was minimal a second ago, but it's not minimal once you add more custom changes. So what that really means is a custom image or a tailored image, or an individually optimized image. That's what's happened almost everywhere that I've really gone in and gotten my hands dirty with a user or a customer to create a minimal image. So I think your question is a very wise one from that perspective. Now, I think our goal here is not going to be to create one image. I think it's actually to have those two images because they serve two different purposes. The minimum image is great when a user wants to build up from that to create something that no human's going to interface with. That's the important thing to me about the minimal image. You work on it when prototyping and developing and creating your application. But once that application or that device is created, you don't SSH into it. You don't talk to that image. It does its thing, and when it stops doing its thing, you kill it and you start a new one. Right? That's why we don't need man pages. That's why I'd argue the locales are less important. That's part of why it being small and secure is important. what we'll never do, and what I'll refuse to do, is change the default Ubuntu server experience to be that minimal experience, right? Surely at some point in your life you've SSH'd into a router, or you've had a boot fail and you end up in the BusyBox shell, or as you said, you're inside of an Alpine shell. How does that feel? Not like Ubuntu. It's not very comfortable. I mean, it's minimal. It's freaking minimal, you know, by design. But it doesn't have that comfortable feel that we've all come to really expect from Ubuntu. So I think we'll always have those two in that combination: a minimal Ubuntu that you build up from, but the comfortable Ubuntu that is our default server experience. All right, ask one more question while I'm typing in my password. Martin. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I have the power.
Yeah, oh, okay, good. I have the power.
About, to let users to pre-install applications, maybe with a phone, when they install Ubuntu, it will, for me, that will not be simple, because a lot of users could be new in Ubuntu, and you are asking, do you want Redbox or PVC?
Right.
What is about what is PVC? They will not, nothing, like
Yep.
you asked me about Apple. So what do you prefer? I will say, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is in response to the suggestion that maybe part of the Ubuntu install experience be that choose your own adventure. Some users may not have the knowledge to make that choice, or may not have the information to make that choice. And I think that's exactly right. So the UX, the user experience designers at Ubuntu are tasked with presenting those questions to users in a way that makes it very simple. And the first question might be, do you want to tailor your experience, or do you want to just accept the recommended defaults? In which case, we will have a default browser. We've always had a default browser and a default terminal and so forth. And there's an easy click, accept all defaults, one button choice. But some of those you might actually want to tailor, or some users might want to tailor. In which case, you can make that selection on an app-by-app basis, and the ones that you opt out of are either not installed. I don't need a local calendar, for instance. I use Google Calendar. There's no, and I don't use Thunderbird, so I don't need to choose a mail client, right? It would be nice, I think it would be nice if my Ubuntu desktop didn't have Thunderbird installed on it. If I tell it, look, I don't need a local mail client, I don't need a local productivity suite. Make sense?
Yes. One question more, please. About servers, I think Ubuntu is the #1 in web servers, but when it's a company with Oracle.
With what?
Oracle.
Oracle. Yep.
I think CentOS and Red Hat is the #1.
Yep.
Will be Ubuntu manage that? Will we work in that area or not?
It's a good question. So the question is, Ubuntu is, easily #1 in web servers and scale-out applications, but that's probably not the case in Oracle and SAP and traditional enterprise. Are we gonna work toward that? So I'm just going to bring this slide up because I think there's something interesting in this set of logos. There's a rough pattern here. Does anybody know what I'm thinking right now? Maybe there's multiple patterns, but there's one in particular I'm going to call out. Many of these companies, not all, but many of these companies are less than 5 years old. They started from day one running Ubuntu. Pinterest, right? Heroku, Netflix, Lyft, Uber, Airbnb. From day one, they started on Ubuntu and scaled out. And some of these are web applications, but there's a lot more than just web applications. I bet, I don't know for certain, but I bet most of those organizations are not running Oracle and SAP and traditional enterprise software, okay? Now some are. You'll see really old companies like Wells Fargo and NTT, You know, these are telcos and banks that have a very diverse set of infrastructure. And Ubuntu is probably a small bit of infrastructure at Wells Fargo and NTT, or Walmart, for instance, right? Our strategy at Canonical has never been to replace Red Hat. We've never put together like a marketing push, or we've never created a tool that says, here's how you lift and shift from Red Hat to Ubuntu. You know, take your Red Hat machines and make them Ubuntu. That's never been our strategy. We've never approached the problem of Linux and open source in that way. What we've tried to do is create an operating system that is chosen, you know, consciously chosen by developers when they're creating a new application. I think that's going to be our strategy for, you know, indefinitely. I don't see any reason why our success has to come at the cost of our friends at Red Hat or SUSE or somewhere else. What I hope is that the next Pinterest, the next Spotify, the next Snapchat continues to choose Ubuntu, and you know, we continue to be an open platform for modern innovation and development. That's not to say that Oracle will never run on Ubuntu or SAP will never run on Ubuntu. We certainly work with both Oracle and SAP to bring their applications to run on Ubuntu as well. But I think we're working a lot more heavily to ensure that Ubuntu is the platform for the next Rust-based application or Golang-based application or the new, you know, PHP or Ruby or Python or whatever, you know, just latest and greatest. Yeah, thank you. Martin.
So I have a question that I've been asked more than once this weekend, and I get asked pretty much every time I go to any kind of community event.
Now I'm scared.
Which is, what insight do you have as to the longevity of Intel 32-bit architecture within Ubuntu?
Really good question. What insight do I have into 32-bit Intel as an architecture? So first of all, let's start by just recognizing the architectures we have within Ubuntu. Intel, 64-bit and 32-bit. We have ARM. ARM HF is 32-bit, and ARM 64 is 64-bit. Now, ARM's complicated because there's a lot of implementations of the ARM architecture, but that's 4 architectures. We also have PowerPC 64EL, which is IBM's 64-bit little Indian power architecture for big servers, bigger than Intel, but not as big as the other one we have, number 6, which is System 390X, which is IBM's 64-bit mainframe operating system. So that's 6 architectures that we have so far. Now, over the history of Ubuntu, we've also had a couple of other architectures that we have deprecated. Spark comes to mind, which was a Sun architecture. PowerPC 32-bit, which was a previous generation of PowerPC, and maybe LPIA, which was a low-power Intel architecture. Those are 3 architectures we've deprecated. You're shaking your head. I think that's nodding. I think that's the only 3 we've deprecated so far. We don't deprecate an architecture lightly. It's a very difficult thing to do, both practically and just throughout the Ubuntu ecosystem, all the places that Ubuntu lives and works. So it's something that takes multiple years of planning to coordinate. As far as I'm aware, we're not in the midst of planning a deprecation of 32-bit Intel. It has been discussed. We have talked about it from time to time. There are reasons, good reasons to consider doing so. 64-bit Intel is more secure than 32-bit. There are security features built into the 64-bit chip that can't be built into the 32-bit chip. Servers themselves are almost overwhelmingly 64-bit. I think 97% of the Ubuntu servers launching today in the public clouds are launching 64-bit Intel. The remaining 3% is split amongst everything else, including 32-bit Intel. That's just public cloud instances. I don't have data for physical machines. So the answer is I'm not aware of any plans to deprecate 32-bit. When we do, if we do make that decision, we'll make that decision known and public long before that decision takes effect. At this point, 1604 has 32-bit binaries available, which means that at least through 2020, we'll have security updates for 32-bit. Plus, we'll add another 2 years of security updates onto the end of that, so through 2022, for extended security maintenance. If we ship 1804, which right now all signs would be that we would ship 1804 with 32-bit Intel, that would then take us to 2023 plus 2 years, so 2025. So I think we've got a bit of longevity left on 32-bit Intel. Question in the back. The SpaceX hat. Awesome hat.
Okay, so it's kind of a follow-up on Martin's question. I have a feeling that in some specific cases, the desktop versions of Ubuntu are suffering due to the fact that they are basically built on the server version. So, for instance, regarding the architecture you just listed, I know currently the version of Firefox in Ubuntu Desktop is way behind where it should be at because of failure to build on the Twin LTS architecture. The one you said is used in mainframes. So in specific instances, I don't really get why a failure to build on the server settings because I mean, who uses a mainframe to run Firefox?
Yeah, absolutely no one in the world. That's a really dumb. That's really dumb, and I'll look into that. We should not be failing to update Firefox due to a fail to build from source on mainframe. So I'll take that one as a to-do to chase that down. We should be able to publish Firefox updates on architecture, and we like to stay in sync where we can, but we can actually just disable the Firefox builds on System 390X. It's a pretty trivial packaging change, and I think arguably, like that one, I think could go through very easily. In the long run, we are working on snaps of Firefox. We'd really like to see Firefox, Mozilla itself, publishing the updates to Firefox, and where canonical, we build the Ubuntu distribution. But our plans around snaps are really to unleash the power of upstreams. Give Mozilla as the upstream for Firefox far more responsibility in updating the Firefox snaps in Ubuntu. Do we have snaps of Firefox yet?
Mozilla are building snaps of Firefox.
So we're working on that with Mozilla Foundation right now. Okay.
All right, and there's another example of this in Artful, if you run Artful daily. When the system boots up, you see one of the first targets of system D is network manager wait online service. Sorry. And so this is kind of weird for a desktop machine to refuse to boot until the network interface is up. You know, I can see it in a network in server settings because sometimes you need to do APC, something like that.
Right. I think that, again, I think that's really good feedback. There's multiple of us here from Canonical today. We can certainly take that back. There are places on the server, as you say, that absolutely require waiting until network services are up. Sometimes for security reasons, we can't do certain things until the network is up. But I agree, in a desktop sense, we should get you to the desktop login screen as quickly as possible. And then if there's, if you're waiting for Wi-Fi or something else, handle that asynchronously. So with that, I think I'm going to be around for a bit longer. I have stickers for Ubuntu stickers, Biobu stickers. Rudy?
I think we have the last question.
Oh, sure. Another question.
I think it's about feedback, desktop feedback.
Okay.
In the feedback, there were nobody asking for having default pre-installed web apps. So what about not keeping some web apps like the Amazon one?
Web apps, so like Chrome extensions, Firefox extensions?
Like the default Amazon on the launcher of Unity?
So they're talking about the Amazon launcher that's in the panel. You click it, it works out where you are in the world and takes you to your regional Amazon.
Ah, right. Right. Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I think that fits very well with the thought process around trying to enable you to personalize your Ubuntu experience up front as much as possible. When you're doing a human-based install, a point-click human-based install, which is different than the machine-provisioned install or the OEM-based install, but on the human-attended install, I think we want to make that give you as much personal control and choice as possible, while still allowing for sensible defaults if you just want to install quickly with as few clicks as possible. Yeah, sure. Another question.
We talked about confinement a lot. On the desktop side, we can now sandbox applications with Snap. I would love this download with the desktop environment sandboxing. So I could have.
You'd like to sandbox the desktop environment? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion. I've been keeping track of the cubes. I don't know if you're familiar with cubes. Cubes is an interesting Linux distro, security in mind. There's sort of 4 different sandboxed zones, like I think it's red, yellow, blue, green. And depending on what you're doing on your desktop, you would switch it into red mode or green mode or blue or yellow mode, where it puts you into a different virtual machine, which is a whole nother desktop that either gets thrown away or is stored. Basically, you have to make some conscious choices about what you're doing, and then it puts you into a more secure mode. I've been keeping track of that project. I'm quite interested in it just as a security professional. Our security team that I mentioned earlier, we certainly look at other Linux distros and where we can learn from one another. We're definitely not too proud to beg, borrow, and steal good ideas when those ideas are good for everyone.
Maybe we could do something like what has been recently done with Docker. You heard about X11 Docker, just a configuration tool.
Yeah.
To provide the X11 socket in AC.
Interesting.
This kind of techniques we could have Postman and Mate running at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Multiple environments. Yeah, that's a really good idea. Okay, well, I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Kelsey Hightower, because that guy is an awesome speaker. And one thing I think I've learned here today from him is that normally when I give a talk, I'm wearing a button-up shirt and a jacket and cufflinks and cowboy boots, and it's just way more comfortable to be in a t-shirt and tennis shoes. I think the content is what is important, right? So hopefully you enjoyed today's content. I certainly appreciate your help in creating this content. It's the feedback that the community and many of the people here present have given that has fed this presentation and hopefully made this presentation interesting to you. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.